Have you ever wanted to make real progress toward attaining deep states of meditative absorption? Ever wanted to gain mastery of the jhanas? If so, check out the Jhana community online at jhana.community. Together with Brian Newman, a meditation teacher trained in the Pa-auk and pragmatic Dharma traditions, we're both leading live weekly practice groups for Jhana community members, focusing on multiplayer jhana and deep jhana. From now through October 15th, we'll be accepting a small batch of new practitioners who want to deepen their meditative capacity together. Learn more at www.jhana.community. Welcome, everyone, to this exciting special event here in the Jhana community. We've invited Brian Newman to join us today to talk about, in quotes, Job Jhāna. Of course, we're using we're using this sort of tongue-in-cheek term for really hardcore, deep jhana training. Our mutual teacher, Kenneth Folk, jokingly used that term on a retreat that we were both at, and it stuck in terms of just, again, tongue-in-cheek. But Brian has that background. Brian's trained in the Pa-auk tradition, which is one of the most prestigious and hardcore of the jhana traditions in Asia that I'm familiar with. And they have some, you could say, really high standards with respect to what constitutes jhana. Would love to jump into that with you, Brian. But first, before we get into your nut job jhana days, I'm curious maybe to start with a bit about how you initially got into this stuff. Did you grow up around it? Did you have a moment where you learned about meditation, dharma? What was your way into this world?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Vince. It's a great question. My origin story changes depending on my mood in the moment. So let's see what I've got here. I didn't start practicing until I think I was 38. I'm 50 now, guys. So that's a 12-year practice history. And the practice was associated with me becoming an executive coach. So I was a salesperson, and I switched professions. And so I was switching to doing one-on-one work with people. And I had the idea that I realized very quickly I needed to be a better listener. I'd like to be a better listener. And I had the idea that if I got real still, if I learned how to be really quiet, then I could probably listen to my clients better. And what happened was I got real still, and I realized how insanely loud my mind was, even if I wasn't talking. So that was a real revelation. And my practice quickly changed from becoming a better listener to getting super fucking enlightened. Became the interest. Is it okay if I say things like that, Vince?
Oh, yeah. For me, it's fine. Yeah, please.
Is that okay, guys? You're looking for nut job genre, right? I'm going to give you a true dose if that's what you're into. And so I, like many of us, I think, I don't know what you guys did. I started with a Goenka retreat. Who doesn't? It's so accessible. It's so free. It's so there, right? So you go do your Goenka retreat. And then I went and did Reggie Ray Tibetan stuff. So I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm doing Goenka, and then I go do Reggie Ray, the Tibetan tradition, and I'm doing other retreats here and there. And then, you know what, I'm almost embarrassed to admit that I spent so much of my life based on one sentence I read in one book, but it was Daniel Ingram's book, actually. It was Mastering the Core Teachings, which I think is a great gift to the Dharma community, a wonderful book that is very inspiring. So Daniel is clearly a great practitioner. Anybody who's read the book understands what a great practitioner he is. And I appreciated that. And then at the beginning of the book, there's a one line that says, if I had to do it over again, I would have started by attaining at least the first jhana before I got into my Vipassana practice. And I'm like, if this dude says that, I'm just going to take that on face value and do it. And that became my jhana journey. So that was probably a year in to meditation when I got that book introduced to me. The book had a huge impact. And then I was actually working with Ron Crouch at the time, another of Kenneth's quite well-known students, a great Dharma teacher. And I'm like, Ron, I want to do jhanas. And he's like, you're not going to do them with me because that's not my thing. And we agreed that I would go do something. I would go pursue that in a very nice way. Like, you always want the teacher that says, that's not my thing. This is the best teacher ever. It's not my thing. Learn it from somebody else. And I started to look for the jhana teachers, which in 12 years ago, there's not much jhana teachers, right, Vince? It's hardly anybody. So there's Lee Brasington. I'm going to say some things, assuming you guys have a bit of context here. There's Lee Brasington. There's Stephen and Tina Rasmussen. Stephen Snyder, Tina Rasmussen. There's Shaila Catherine. Both those two are in the Pa-auk tradition. Lee Brasington's Ayya Khmer. It's a totally different genre. And frankly, I couldn't find anybody else. And I'm living in Asia at the time, guys. I lived in Asia most of my life. And so I chose the hardcore. I read Stephen and Tina's book, and I'm like, if I'm going to do the thing, I might as well do it as hardcore as possible. And I started to do retreats. I did one retreat with them, to be clear. And then I worked with them for about a year. And then I found a nun in Asia, Sayale Susila, who has a retreat center called Appamada Vihari, which means dwelling in diligence in Sanskrit, which tells you exactly what kind of practitioner and teacher she is. There's something very special about finding a hardcore nun in Asia to teach you the Dharma. This is the way, I think. It's really a beautiful experience. So she's not public. You can go look at her retreat center. It'll say, the first thing you'll read is not open to any new students, no private retreats allowed. All this is negotiable, in case you guys are interested. So she's setting up a lot of obstacles for you to even get there. Interesting, isn't it? It's very interesting, very Asian. And I go to the retreat center and it's just a fucking magical place in Penang on an island in the jungle on a mountain. I can't even describe it. There's nobody there, you guys, and this retreat hall could fit 300 people. There's a medicine Buddha the size of a house in there. It's unbelievable. And I'm the only one practicing, and sometimes there would be like rotating nuns who'd come through. So I probably went there 5 or 6 times over the course of a couple of 3 years. And in February of 2018, she said, Brian, it's very clear to me that you have attained the 3rd jhana, and I think you're probably bouncing around the 4th. This is the first time anybody had ever acknowledged me as attaining jhanas. So Sayadaw Susila had spent 10 years at the Mahasi Center under the Sayadaw teachings, under Mahasi. Then she goes and becomes lead attendant for Pa-auk Sayadaw, traveling with him around Asia. She spent like 3 years with him in Sri Lanka. She told me in confidence one day, she didn't say she attained path, but she said, one of my big breakthroughs was just suffering in Sri Lanka, tending to Pa-auk Sayadaw in this primitive environment, was how she described it. So she was with him the whole time. She was the lady behind the curtain with Pa-auk Sayadaw. So I'm getting the Pa-auk Sayadaw teachings in its full form from her. And this was a really beautiful experience to me. It's what I'd been looking for, was the essence of it, I thought. And then I met Kenneth. And then Kenneth took a hatchet to what I had learned in the traditional way. And you guys, I think, maybe have some experience or know of Kenneth. And he's an iconoclastic teacher. And he really opened up the jhana for me in amazing ways. That is where my practice is today. So maybe I could just rephrase what I said there. I have very traditional teaching, specifically in the Pa-auk lineage. I've been validated in the Pa-auk lineage. Their model of attaining jhana is a 3-hour timed sit. One makes a resolution, you exit 3 hours later without looking at a watch, you naturally come out of the absorbed jhana 3 hours. I'm sitting on the floor, guys. I'm not sitting in easy chairs like they do at a lot of retreat centers. On the cushion, straight back, 3 hours, come out of the moment. That's how you get jhana. And so if you talk to Stephen or Tina, that's the way they did it. They went through all 8. They did all the kasinas for every single one. This is a serious, like a multi-month practice to complete that whole cycle. And Sayadaw Susila has said to me, I think you should teach. So I've been validated by her to go ahead and teach this. So I have a very traditional Pa-auk background, and I'm very appreciative of those models, and I understand them very well. And then I have a really sort of modern, postmodern view as well about not needing to be totally absorbed. I have a much looser view about jhana on the spectrum. And I believe there's a flavor of jhana that can be very light, and then there's a really strong flavor. And there's different ways to get into those different states.
Okay, cool. We should talk more about the spectrum, because that's something we've been exploring.
Are you into the spectrum?
Jhana community.
I'm all into the spectrum. It's only the spectrum. Anybody that's telling you it's not the spectrum is engaged in black and white thinking, which is unskillful. It's like, what is black and white in the world? Jhana, not jhana, is a really misguided way to approach jhana, I think. How about how much jhana?
Okay, cool. Before we switch into that, could you talk a little bit more about the training that you received with Sayadaw Susila?
Sayadaw Susila, S-U-S-I-L-A.
I want one side note here. Very interestingly, a couple of my friends here in Asheville recently organized a retreat for college kids and invited her out to lead it. And they were telling me, we've got this nun who's in the Pa-auk tradition. She's from Malaysia. The more details I got, the more I realized this was your teacher. Really? And I was shocked because of how you've talked about how inaccessible she is. And I was like, wow. And they're like, yeah, no one's ever heard of her. I was like, I have. My friend Brian's trained with her.
Oh, that's impressive.
So
Did she come?
Yeah, she did. She came and led her. Really? I think it was a week-long retreat for American college kids.
Oh, that's amazing. I was in a teacher talk. We have a close relationship. I can be joking with her, and I'm like, I don't know. These 3-hour sits are killing me. Like, they're brutal, right? She's like, I'll come sit with you tomorrow. I've never seen her sit before. Like a stone forever, you guys. 8 hours? I don't know. 6 hours? Like, she's just not going to move. She's just sitting like a fucking stone. So impressive.
Okay, so how does one learn to sit like a stone? What was the
Okay.
training like on the way
Yeah.
up to 3 hours of stoniness?
This is the primary dilemma, guys, because all these books about jhana, and I'll tell you the instructions of how to get jhana. It's 2 words, right? There's all these books, but it's 2 words. Focus here. That's it. You realize that's the end of the practice instructions. So then we just become sort of masturbatory about all the different ways we can focus here, but it's constantly focus here. So here's what happens. Westerners go to the Pa-auk monastery. Pa-auk's now in like San Francisco or something. He doesn't live in Malaysia, or he doesn't live in Burma anymore. I'm not even sure if he's alive actually, but he moved to the US. So they go to the Pa-auk monastery and they are told to focus here, which is the only instruction in jhana. Focus here, focus on the Anapana spot, or it's the Anapana region is a more modern way to talk about it, because it might be not a spot, but a little bit more holistic. And then the Western practitioner who's been trained at perhaps Western retreat centers where it's really okay to psychologicalize your practice will come in with all the reasons why they can't focus here. And they'll tell a lot of stories about the stories of her life. And we all have a lot of stories and traumas and challenges and aspirations. And the teacher listens to them and says kindly to them some nice things, and they go and they try to practice more. So the Western practitioner takes a long time, is what I'm getting. It doesn't seem to go too smoothly, is what I hear in the Pa-auk monastery. I haven't been to Burma. The lay people, the Burmese women, often the ones who have the time to practice, will come in and the teacher says, focus here. And they just go, they don't think about it because they're reverent to the teacher, and they just focus here. And 2 weeks later, they've got jhana. This is like well known. There's something really fascinating about just taking that simple instruction and just doing the thing for a really long time. So I'm super into getting jhana fast, and I have lots of hacks, and a certain kind of person can jack their way and hack their way and grind their way into jhana. If you guys want to know that, I'll talk to you about that all day. I wanted to know it. It's good to know, right? However, I would suggest to you guys that jhana is much better slow, like some other things in life. Slow food is better than fast food, right, Vince?
Indeed, it is.
Indeed it is. Making love slowly is often better than fast. Playing the saxophone with a slow vibe is nicer than playing it like all fast, I think, in many cases. Isn't it amazing there's still practices in the world that are encouraging patience? And if you guys remember, or if you've read, maybe the Buddha predicted that the end of times and the end of the Dharma would come when people stopped practicing jhana. And so I think it's really wonderful that we're talking about. I think it's really wonderful that Vince is in fight with people on Twitter about sort of nuances of jhana, because we're talking about it. And that means we're not at the end of time. This is amazing. I'm super delighted by this. I have no opinion on the argument. I just think it's really interesting that we're talking about it. 12 years ago, we weren't even talking about it. So I'm stoked about that. With the practice, what's the right way to say it? What are they actually teaching you in the practice? I think you got to fill it out for yourself. So I'm going to get focus here from the SILA, and she's really not going to engage with me much more than focus here. And then question me if I say anything. I'll give you an example. I went to a teacher once and I said, every time I sit down to sit, this is actually Tina. Every time I sit down to sit, all I'm getting is spiders. I'm just getting spiders all the time. I'm trying to do jhana, I'm just getting spiders. And there were spiders all over the retreat center, like everywhere you went. It was somewhere in Pacific Northwest in the US. It's crazily filled with spiders. I didn't love spiders at the time. I've changed my relationship because of that retreat. And I'm talking about the spiders. And she says to me, what's the most important thing to you right now? And I said, the breath and getting jhana. And she says, then why are you talking to me about spiders? That was good teaching, you guys. She just said, focus here. Stop talking about stuff, focus here. So that's the instruction. I think we need to fill that out a little bit for somebody who's, if you guys are on this call today, you care about this, I think. So you want to fill it out. So I would suggest you go read some other books. So read Richard Shankman's book, which tells you how all the different teachers think about jhana. That's a great start. Go to Lee Brasington and learn the jhanic factor way in. So that's a great teaching. It's totally in the suttas. It's very sutta based. And then all the other ways we can think to hack our way. And Kenneth has lots of different hacks. But primarily, Vince, I would say the teaching I got was focus here. And when you don't feel like focusing here, focus here more. That was basically it. It was a very rigorous down the line. If you can't take it, fine, don't come back.
Okay, so in that sense, I mean, that fits with the kind of traditional method. It's pretty simple and straightforward and direct, but sometimes maybe there's like a lack of kind of exposition or opening it up to all the different ways you can hack or grind, like you said.
Yeah.
So that's extremely powerful, but then if it doesn't work for someone, it also can be like, can really not work. Yeah, so it's good that you were able to follow those simple instructions.
Yeah, and even the sutta-based instructions are better than focus here, right? So here's what the sutta says. find somewhere really quiet, bring mindfulness to the fore. So we could have a whole session, right? What does it mean to bring mindfulness to the fore? Interesting. Does he mean bring it to the tip of your nose, Kalia? Maybe it's an Anapana thing. Does he mean bring it to the mind, have awareness that you're doing a mindful practice? If you guys have gone and looked at the suttas about the bath maker making the ball of soap and turning, that's the similes of the jhana, those are great practice instructions for the practitioner. May I remind you that the fruits of the practice are only available to those who practice, Rupa Koti Mahasi. So if we haven't done the practice, focus here is the best instruction ever. If we have done the practice, the similes of the bath maker and making this weird ball of soap suddenly start to make sense. The jhanic factors become entry points. You guys, you can have piti all day long. Have you ever had piti just like watching a movie or listening to angelic voices of a choir? I'm getting it right now talking about piti. Why couldn't I just take that and use it to access jhana? Because it's a jhanic factor. I think I could. So we're looking for, guys, and this is a Kenneth teaching, we're looking for handles. You've got 6 senses, 5 senses plus the mind, and there's going to be handles that are going to allow you to hold the jhana in many different ways. We could go through each of the senses and talk about the handles, but let me just give you an example from the auditory sense, the ear sense. Many people, not all, will get a ringing in the ears that's associated with high concentration, and that's called the nada. You guys aware of that? It's like the sound of the universe, it's sometimes said. So does anybody get that? A ringing in your ears? You might not even notice. It's very subtle. It's said to be the sort of sound of the cosmological sound of the universe, or it could just be the sound that you hear internally when you get super, super concentrated. So if I can get a sense of the nada and there's a jhanic factor arising, I know where to put my eyes and I'm good at following the breath. Ajahn Chah said he could enter jhana in one breath. I suggest you can enter jhana in one moment. You don't need to do the, you can just go in. You can just drop in. And I'm saying this sort of nonchalantly, only because I met Kenneth Folk some 5 years ago, and it's true that you can only go in, but he was the person that made that a possibility for me by opening the idea of that up. As did Ajahn Chah in his own way, saying you could enter in the breath. That seems pretty revolutionary in the time.
That's interesting. I never heard the Ajahn Chah quote on entering jhana through the breath. But his background, like a lot of people don't know, like he did super hardcore jhana training and Vipassana jhana training and all that before he met his teacher, Ajahn Moon, who was like, let go of the states.
Berated him for being in jhana, right?
Yeah, which was a good advanced teaching, but.
So Ram Dass used to enter jhana when he was with Babaji in India, and it's talked about in Grist for the Mill, which is a wonderful Dharma book. And Babaji would see him super concentrated, and he'd come up to him and say, "Hey, Ram Dass, how much money you make?" He would come to deliberately break his concentration to teach him about not being in those concentrated states.
That's lovely. Okay, so Brian, when you stopped intensively working on the Pa-auk Jhana program, you said there was a few years in which you were going on retreats and working hardcore on that project. Where did you leave that training in terms of what you felt like you'd learned from it or accomplished or whatever, however you'd like to talk about that?
Yeah. My Dharma path has been a lot about trying to attain things that I didn't have and then not being so impressed when I attained them. Does anybody have that experience? I think this is a really good experience to have, guys, because it all starts to fall away and we become immune from states. So the pinnacle of my nut job jhana practice was probably, I check into an Airbnb in Hong Kong and I do a 2-week solo. It's in an island, actually, so it's not even in Hong Kong proper, and it's a super crappy, disgusting Airbnb. It's 150 square feet, filled with somebody's shit. I hadn't vetted it first, and I brought enough food for 2 weeks, and I'm not going to leave this 150 square foot place for 2 weeks. And I didn't. Basically, I'm not going to leave until I get jhana. So it was 2 weeks, but I was willing to extend. I'm just going to go for it. And I think I should have taken a picture. Around day 5, I start putting pictures up. I start putting writings up on the wall. So I've gone full on mad person now. If the police came, it's a crime scene. And I didn't bring much paper. So I've got like paper towel tubes and stuff that I'm writing on. And all I write is focus here. And I put it everywhere that I could possibly see, including the shower, you guys. It says focus here. So one of the areas you're going to lose your concentration is in the shower and eating. So we learn if we're serious jhana practitioners, you never let the pot stop boiling. So it's really slow eating becomes a very interesting practice of maintaining the Nimita if you have it, or the awareness of the breath. And the shower is a tough one. Try washing yourself or trying to maintain the jhana. So in the shower, focus here. Around day 12, I had a massive breakdown. Who wouldn't? And I actually left in the middle of the night and went down to the beach and cried for 3 hours. And then I had finished the retreat out and I was like, I'm never going to do that again. That was so much suffering to be free of suffering, which is a Dharma dilemma, isn't it? So around this time, I was really fortunate to have met Kenneth. And the first thing that Kenneth would say to me was like, don't take this stuff so preciously. Let me show you how I can go through the 8 jhana in 2 minutes. What are you talking about? Oh, if you've been there once, of course, you can just do it again right now. Just remember, just go there. And it's just like really encouraging me that way. So it really loosened up the practice. Now I'm continuing to go see the nun. So I would ask Kenneth, what should I say to Susa Susa? He's like, don't tell her anything. He says, just say, I'm here to learn and please teach me, which was really great advice. So I just kept getting your Pa-auk from her. I'm getting like the things that were really amazing, magical from Kenneth, and that sort of the duet of that was what really worked for me. So what ended up happening from Kenneth's teaching was he taught me eye postures. And I think that's the moment, the hack. So if you're able to bring your eyes to the jhana 1, 2, or 3, or 4, the distinct eye postures, drishti it's called in Sanskrit, I think that is the thing that gets us into jhana quicker than anything else. And guys, just a general suggestion, it's worthwhile to pay attention to where your eyes are in any practice of meditation. If any of you have ever done Mahamudra, where do your eyes go when you do Mahamudra? That's really interesting. Where are the monks' eyes when they're doing open eye Dzogchen? You can take a look. Very interesting what's happening with eyes. And there's some hidden teachings in the text, I think. I've mentioned to Susa Susa about eye postures once against my better judgment. And she says, you're looking with your eyes? Because she wants an internal drishti. She doesn't want a real drishti. Because you're looking with your eyes. And I say, yeah, I'm looking with my eyes. And she goes, if you're already doing it, keep doing it. It's okay. That seems like that was a kind of an interesting way to respond to that comment. So I felt like Kenneth was really onto something there when she validated that. Kenneth really helped me make things quicker. So I didn't have to sit. Guys, I would sit like, in daily life, I would have a 3-hour sit to start my day for years. And then I would sit like an hour at night. This is how you maintain jhana in daily life. I probably would have to do an hour and a half to 2 in the morning and 30 to an hour later in the day. And with that practice, I could enter any jhana on the Tokyo subway in rush hour if I was sitting down. That's where I got with the practice. And so what else do you need to do? At that point, I didn't need to do anything else. I'd had it. I realized that there's 2 people that cared in the world, my teacher Kenneth and my friend Vince. And so I wasn't really impressing anybody. My wife didn't care, my friends didn't care, nobody else cared. And so I got loose around it. And when I got loose around it, I started to be able to really have some fun with it. And it became now my jhana is much more like playing the saxophone. It's real gentle. If there's a Nimita, I'll go with it, but I don't try to worry about the Nimita. And so it's I'm going to call it opportunistic jhana, where I'm not so rigorous. Now, preparing to talk to you guys today, I wanted to dust off the skills. So I've spent the past couple of weeks practicing pretty rigorous jhana. And it's really fascinating to do that, how fun it is, and then how much it impacts my life. I notice that I sit much quieter. My yoga practice is really different just by doing a little bit of jhana practice before that. Does that answer the question, Vince?
Yeah, no, really interesting. What you're saying there about just ramping up your jhana practice recently flashed me back to the last retreat I did, which was a jhana retreat with Philip Moffitt. Right after that, I had scheduled it's like a Rolfing session as they must massage the fascia. And it was shocking how much more pliable my body was after sitting on my ass for 10 days, breathing. And even the Rolfer was like, holy crap, this is like a lot different than our normal sessions. That really showed me the power of jhana, like hardcore jhana.
Yeah. And you said they're so interesting because what's the end game here, guys? Nobody ever said the end game was to get jhana. What's the end game? Buddha wants us to have the mind that is pliant and malleable. That's what he said. So if we have a triangle where it's first jhana is the bottom layer, second jhana it goes all the way up and you get Nirodha somewhere at the top. I think the peak of the triangle is a mind that is malleable and pliant, which is really interesting because that's not quite what an absorbed jhana mind is. An absorbed jhana mind is super one-pointed and it can burn a hole through things because it's like a laser. And so I really lived in that dichotomy for a while and I had to make a life choice about which do I like better. I like a pliant and malleable mind more than I like a laser focus pointer. I can see a tremendous value in that. It's really great for my golf game. If I want to putt, turn on the jhana mat, some great putting. If I practice archery, it's a wonderful practice. If I need to sit down and plan a class that I'm going to teach and need to have sort of 4 hours of really focused concentration, no problem. Concentration, no problem anymore. But it's much nicer to play the saxophone, I would say. Much more in line with where I am. And also, when you get something, you can, how does it go? Once you got the call, you can hang up the phone. Isn't that what Somebody famous said.
That was Ram Dass, no?
Was that Ram Dass? Once you got the
Yeah,
call,
I
you can hang
think
up
so.
the phone.
Yeah, that's cool. It makes sense. So you had this period where you were training intensively, and then what I find really interesting about your description too is the what it took you to maintain that type of access in
People don't
modern
talk about
life.
that. People don't talk about that.
Yeah, no one's. I've never
Wife
heard
goes
anyone
to
talk
the
about that.
bathroom at the restaurant, I'm going to be in Jhana. I'm waiting in a line in the grocery store, I'm going to be in Jhana. Crowd of Tokyo Subway, but waiting for a client meeting in an expensive lobby of a corporate building, I'm going to be in Jhana. That's how I was living my life.
So you were not living in a way that would have you lose access to that subtle level of concentrative awareness.
To go into the seventh jhana while waiting in line at the post office is no easy feat. And that's not meant to be egotistical. It's super cool to be able to play the drums. It's super cool to be able to do Aikido. It's super cool to cook Vietnamese food. And it's super cool to go into seventh jhana in the post office. We all have our things we're into. Just another really fun thing to like figure out in one's life for those that are interested.
Nice. Spoken like a true lifelong learner. You've mentioned the term Nimita a number of times, and I know probably everyone here is familiar, but for those that might not be who are listening to this later or whatever, could you talk about what the Nimita is in the context of Pa-auk training?
Yeah, sure. So in the tradition, the Nimita is a sign. I believe Nimita is at least it means sign, and it's something that arises in the mind through concentration. And so the Pa-auk tradition is anapanasati leading to the Nimita, and then one takes the Nimita as the object, which is interesting, right? Because you might wonder, why would you move away from the thing that got you there in the first place, which was the breath, and switch to something else? And that's a really interesting question. So there's some traditions that say, don't do that. Aya Khmer, my understanding, she said that was a distraction, and one shouldn't look at the Nimita. Now, it doesn't matter. I'll talk more about the Nimita in a second, but it doesn't matter because a Nimita is going to arise. So here's what happens in my experience. The Nimita arises. It's a very exciting moment when the Nimita arises for the first time, and one wants to look at the Nimita because this is like the best thing. We're trying to get the Nimita, and the Nimita is squirrely. The Nimita always will go away when you look at it. And so it doesn't really matter whether you choose or not to look at it. If it happens for you, not everybody is prone to getting the Nimita, then one will become absorbed in the Nimita if it arises, and not by looking at the Nimita, by taking it as an object, but by continuing the practice of anapanasati that you were doing before. So let me flesh out the Nimita a little bit more. It does not happen for everybody, and the Pa-auk tradition acknowledges this. So there's a separate path for those who are not predisposed to getting the Nimita, which I think is just wonderful. Isn't it nice to have an alternative? The alternative path is that you're going to work on the 4 elements, and you're going to vipassanize. You're going to do vipassana using the 4 elements as your way of doing vipassana. So I'm not going to say pressure when my shoulder or my elbow is resting on the chair. I'm going to say earth element because that's earth, and then the wind element would be the pressure. This is very interesting and shamanistic. So they want you to do 4 elements. You do that a ton until the body dissolves, and then that's enough concentration for you to start vipassana practice, which is meant to get you enlightened. Our tradition is not about getting jhana. It's about getting enlightened. He just wants you to get all the jhana super great. He wants you to do wet vipassana, get super, super good at jhana, and then bring it into your vipassana practice. His whole game is just, you got to get enlightened. So much so to the point that he asked, if I'm not mistaken, in that tradition, you have to revoke the bodhisattva vow so that you can get enlightened. So I've had teachers that were asked to revoke their bodhisattva vow so that they could progress in his tradition, and they declined to do so because they didn't want to revoke the bodhisattva vow. Super interesting also, I think. It tells us how these rigorous traditions differ from Mahayana and stuff like that. So what else is not really talked about in the Nimita? So traditionally, it's considered to be a bright white light, like who turned the lights on, headlight, flashlight shining in your face. That's not true for everybody, though. Everybody can have different. So there's reverse Nimitas. You can have a black Nimita with a white ring around it. This is not such a rare thing. And then there's just signs. And so probably the most concentrated I've ever been, like way deep into a long solo in Penang, I'm getting Buddha head Nimitas, spinning skull Nimitas, like pick a Nimita, upside down Buddha head Nimitas, just wild stuff going on. And I could basically take any of those things as an object and use them. Now, I don't know other traditions well enough to know what would happen, but the act of absorption is the Nimita getting bigger and bigger and closer and closer and bigger. And then there's a sense of being sucked into it. And that's an absorption in the tradition. And I think, Vince, I don't know, you can see if you can validate this. I think you know if you've been absorbed. I don't think it's one of those things where maybe I'm a stream enterer, maybe I've had a fruition, maybe that was an A and P. I think if you've been absorbed, Vince, what do you think about that? You think it's a pretty
In the way that you're describing, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. What else about the nimitta? It's very frustrating when it's not arising and you've been told that's the thing that's going to get you to jhana. So really baked into that practice is some real frustration-inducing stuff. My first retreat with Tina and Steve, it's all about the nimitta. So I just basically sat for 11 days not getting the nimitta and freaking out because I'm a jhana failure, not getting the nimitta. I only learned later that not everybody gets the nimitta. I'm a fortunate person that does. Now, this only happens for me if I do some pretty serious practice, like the past few days I've been giving little glimmers, or opportunistically, it happens on any random day when I close my eyes, suddenly I have a nimitta and I can work with it. I have a love for the nimitta simply because it arises for me, and it's a really wonderful thing to be absorbed into that.
This is a really interesting conversation because, like, for me, I don't get nimitta or don't often. I did my very earliest practice years. It was a lot of light and a lot of visual stuff, and then it all died down and didn't arise again.
Interesting.
Yeah, really interesting, including on like very long retreats. For me, I'm not super into the nimitta. Vipassana was more of my way into concentration. So I would have loved the element practice, I think. But when I was on retreat with Jack Kornfield, I remember talking to him about the Pa-auk tradition, and he suggested that it was probably only about 10% of people who went on those retreats, Americans, who he was referring to, in this case, not the local Burmese, would even be able to get into Pa-auk Jhana 1, so that they would like actually have the capability or raw talent, or that their body mind would fit with that model such a way that it was easy. So I wanted to throw that out to you. What do you think of that statement?
It's so disempowering. It's painful, isn't it? So Stephen and Tina told me that, I think they're on a 3-month, or maybe it was a 1-month with Pa-auk side, first time he came to the US, that nobody else got Jhana on that retreat except for them, which is just like wildly disempowering. But I do think there's predispositions, Vince. And guys, it's an open question. So I have a sense that maybe I'm just prone to concentrated states in general as a human being. So I've done martial arts from an early age. I'm a black belt in Japanese archery, which is very single pointed. I do 3 hours of yoga every day for 10 years. So I'm doing lots of things that are like supporting a concentration practice. So I'm not sure if it's like predisposition or if I worked my way into that by developing it. But I think like anything in life, some of us are going to have some skills or strengths, rather, some talents in some areas. Some others may not be talented in, which leads us to the wonderful truth that dry or wet seems to work.
Okay, this is interesting. I'm thinking like the best analogy here is like high performance sports. I was an amateur cross country track runner before I got old and became a parent and all that. And I remember competing at the sort of like state level of championship level. To get there, you had to prove yourself in multiple races leading up to that. You don't just show up to the state level championships and be like, I'm here, I'm ready to run the mile. So that's something that seems different with the Olympic level jhana versus Olympic level anything else. There's a bit more of a filter to filter people out before they get to that level of training, where it's actually, no, like you were only able to run this fast, like you haven't met the standard for being able to go to the Olympics or whatever it is.
It calls to mind a couple of stories, Vince, that are so on point with that. So I won't say the names because I think it's too much information. Teacher interview, the teacher said to me, I can look around this retreat center and I can tell you who will ever get jhana and who won't. And Brian, you will. This was very helpful for me, not so helpful for everybody else that they'd been pinned down to not get it. But he knew what's up. He'd been doing the practice for 30 years. He saw something, he could tell. So that was really interesting. And the other one I had was the first time I ever met Silas Cecile. I remember vividly, I'm in the kitchen of the retreat center and she comes up to me and she says, I think the first words out of her mouth were, I can see you have very strong past life paramitas. And the Western world is not unapologetically Buddhist cosmology like that. But if you believe in karma, then what I would like to say to you right now is that you may have had a really fortunate, you've had some great past life stuff going on. Well, she's literally the first thing she says. I haven't told her anything about my practice. You're going to work on the light kasina because that's the fastest way to get jhana, and fast is better. Like, okay. Isn't that great to meet a teacher so in the tradition, there's 40 objects and the teacher's going to find the best one for you. And the jeweler is going to get a ruby to work on. This is like a sutta-based story. The Buddha chose a red sapphire for this guy because he's a jeweler and that was the easiest thing to concentrate on. Kenneth's got a whole story about you want to get really concentrated, just take a cereal bowl and set it on a table and look at it every day for an hour. There's all these funny things you can say. But there's something very special about finding an Asian teacher who still is in that model. And they're going to say, Keith, this is the best object for you. And by the way, I can tell you did this in your past life. So probably just do more of that. I'm not going to come down on true or false. It's just wonderful to hear it. And Vince, it does seem like there's quality there of amateur versus pro. I don't know if that's the right distinction, but something around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And even within professional levels, there's distinction, amateur pro versus Tiger Woods or Caitlin Clark. So yeah, this isn't talked about that much because I think mostly the conversation around meditation is a broader conversation that's happening in our culture. People are practicing, they're trying to establish like a daily practice, often 10 plus minutes a day. So we're not professional jhana practitioners, most of us. But I think it's really useful to acknowledge that there is professional levels that are possible. It can be inspiring, and it just helps. I think it helps me to just see my practice in relation to what's out there and what's possible. And like you said, the point of jhana, and this has been true for me too, isn't like jhana itself, although that can be nice and is cool. But it's more, what can I do with a mind that is capable of this kind of focus?
Pliant and malleable. And guys, you know what's great? I don't know about you guys. I can't read a Dzogchen text. I'll read like 4 pages. Be like, oh my God, what? Or Mahamudra even said, what? Jhana is not a hidden teaching. You want to know what it's like to become the pro, the master that Vince and I are talking about? Just go read the 5 masteries. It's explicitly stated, the 5 jhana masteries. You learn how to advert, enter, abide, exit, reflect. So right there, that's what I would do next after focus here, because that's just filling out the whole practice. It starts with, may the mind incline to the first jhana. At the end, we say, did the mind incline to the first jhana? What a great practice. How many jhana practitioners are doing that, would you say? And if they're not, they're just not opening up to the masteries. It's said right there, they're called the 5 masteries. Yeah, clearly, this is what it takes to be a master.
Such a good model. And it's interesting to consider that alongside what you mentioned, jhana on the spectrum, because presumably you can attain that mastery at the light level, at the deeper level, at the ultra deep level.
Absolutely. My criteria lately is, did I have the flavor of jhana? So here's the Kenneth story. I love this story. So let me tell you guys. So somebody gives you a glass of clear liquid, and they take a couple like micro milliliters of super concentrated strawberry essence that has no color to it. And they give you this glass of water and they say, drink it. And you drink it and they say, what does it taste like? And you say, it's strawberry. It's always strawberry, right? It doesn't matter how much, it doesn't have to be red and actually have strawberries in it to taste like strawberry. So that's my barometer now, is, did I have that quality? Because I know if the quality is there, it's just a ball rolling down the hill, gathering speed. That's what jhana is. So we're just going to let it happen. If I have longer to let that quality manifest into all the beautiful things that I know are there, it'll happen. If I only have 30 minutes this morning, I'm good enough with just a little taste, a little tingling on the back of the neck, a little bliss in the lower regions. Sounds good to me.
Now, your earlier question about like the entering of jhana through the Nimita and how that's like very obvious, like I'd say that rings true to me at like the moderately deep or deeper levels, but the light jhana doesn't have that quality to me as much, feeling like it's not absolutely obvious. Yeah.
Oh, not even close for me. Not even close.
Yeah.
I think there's a fine line too between really deep jhana practice and absorptions. What's the difference? Somebody tell me the difference between a long duration fruition, 8th jhana, perception, neither perception nor non-perception, and a good nirodha. Come on, maybe Daniel Ingram's going to parse that out for us in some clear way. Nobody's going to really tell you or know the difference. So basically the way my practice, the way I concluded is the wrong word, but was like happy to let it sit and do other things, was practicing one by one as they occurred. So just working up and down, asasanizing the jhanas, up and down. And every time I would do this, when I got into the later stages, I would be gone, guys, not absorbed, gone for significant periods of time. And it happened so often, I would get really clear on coming out. So it'd be like, oh, audio formations just kicked in. Oh, mind just kicked in. It was like real clear. I think that's like a nirodha-like thing, pretty much. But maybe that's perception, non-perception. Maybe that's the super long duration fruition. And it doesn't matter. I was gone for a long time. It seemed good. It's like, I don't have this, maybe it's my personality. I don't have the desire to parse those states out so much for that to happen. And I'm perfectly comfortable with calling that the super high-end Pa-auk tradition. So a teacher told me once, I said to a really skillful Pa-auk teacher, how long does it take you to get to Jhana? So he's not practicing 4 hours a day life. And he said, 2 to 3 days on retreat, maybe more. Vividly remember this quote. I didn't love that. I wanted to have access all the time. 2 to 3 days on retreat, like, but to his credit, what he was saying was that's how long it takes me to get a massive nimitta, to get absorbed and to sit for 3 hours and emerge after 3 hours with nobody prompting me. So that's pretty amazing for 2 or 3 days. I don't know if I could get up to that level in just only 2 or 3 days of practice.
Yeah, more or less the same thing when someone asked her, how long would it take you to power up to the level of jhana where you can be absorbed for days on end or whatever? And she was like, yeah, a few days.
Yeah, so I totally appreciate that now. And then I was dismissive at the time. I was like, oh, he's just defining jhana too hard. But now I just see, yeah, that's how long it would take to get that. How long does it take you to get really light jhanic flavor? That's at 1 moment, less than a breath.
Yeah, cool. Okay, great. This is bringing some nuance to the jhana spectrum. The deeper end of the jhana spectrum sounds like it is attainable, but probably would require lots of daily practice. Like we're talking multiple hours a day.
That's my sense, and I've heard that echoed. I remember hearing Lee Brazelton say that as well. I think he might have even said you need to do 4 hours a day, or like some really specific idea of how long that would take.
Yeah, but it's not like 10 minutes, basically.
It's for me, guys, it was the nimitta. The nimitta is when you take the pot off the boiling water and it stops boiling. So in the really classical Thai Theravada tradition, they talk about guarding the sign. Like you guard the nimitta. It's like the most precious thing. You do not ever let the nimitta go. And that was why I would have to maintain such a long daily practice, was like whenever I would look, I could find the nimitta. And it was quite frustrating to have to rebuild that whole thing up again. So I just chose to try to maintain that. I'll be really honest, it's not sustainable in daily life unless you're doing what I did. Here's how this works out for relationships. I would be sitting there in jhana, but at dinner with my wife, and she'd be like, stop meditating. I'd be like, oh, you caught me? I'm completely tranced out. I'm not even with her.
Yeah, no, I could see that being a real problem in a lot of cases. Okay, so that's an interesting statement. So is it even possible to maintain that kind of ultra deep jhana in modern life? Answer is yes, but like at the cost of what?
Yeah, with some significant practice and being careful. Guys, it's really crazy. You guys have had big experiences, I'm sure. It's like being stuck in a third jhanic state. Has ever happened to you, Vince? The world is like super wacky. So trying to have a client meeting while being stuck in a jhanic state is like not a really skillful way to do work. It's quite difficult. It does have a direct impact on our daily lives. Have you guys talked about correlating stages of insight with jhana?
I think we've talked about it a little bit in that you can look at both the Shamata jhana and Vipassana jhana are like 2 different ways of looking at jhana. We've talked a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So third jhana for me sits in the whole dukkha spectrum.
Yes.
And then the second and the first would be pre-dissolution. So third jhana is dissolution and onwards. And everything before that would be first and second, is the way I think about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like I spend about 50% or more of my time in third jhana. So I don't know.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question. So if we play with eye postures or you just do it yourself, so here's the open question, guys. Where does the drishti, the gaze, want to go when you close your eyes? And you can sometimes the eyes will do the flickering thing when we sit and we're agitated, but naturally, where do they want to rest? You'll find sometimes the Anapana spot is like a really comfortable to go there. And sometimes it's super, super uncomfortable and like painful, probably because we're abiding in a dukkha and it's a much more sort of round donut-like awareness that the eyes want to be in. My position on that is take the easy one. Like what jhana do you want? If 3 is just sitting there for you, take 3 and then work your way down to 1 and then back up and play a little bit. If I'm just grinding away at first, as I was this morning, like hilariously, like I literally had cracked up after 20 minutes. He was like, wow, that's literally just impossible to get first jhana right now. But if I tried the others, I'm sure they would have been accessible. I was going to talk to you guys. So it was like trying to make a point about how good I was and I'm not. It's just real funny. It was a great comeuppance.
Yeah, Robert Bea talks about that as well in the jhana retreat that he led. He was recommending folks, if they can't get PT going and get access through the first jhana, I was like, maybe the 4th jhana is more accessible for you. You just come in through the 4th and then explore the spectrum.
Robert Bea, may he rest in peace, a wonderful Dharma teacher, has what was the line that he had about that? So don't control the breath. Anapanasati is all about letting go of the breath, right? Notice the breath being long or short, count the breath, don't control it. Verbatim, who said don't control the breath? Do whatever you want, breathe well, breathe good. So he's encouraging you to use the breath really deliberately to provoke pleasant sensations in the body. Seems skillful to me. If you get some sukha, you're going to really easily fall into jhana. He's a totally iconoclastic teacher. It's not really spoken about how much of an iconoclast he is. He is so out there with some of the stuff he says. Wonderful, helpful way.
Yeah. It seemed to help that he came up within the insight tradition and then became more iconoclastic over time. So he maintained his one foot in the institution and just kind of also went beyond it in so many ways, clearly. Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that. Okay, I'm just checking in with the time here. Brian, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we open it up for follow-up questions?
No, I talked a lot, guys. I get really excited. It's much more pleasant for me actually to hear what's going on with you, and if I could be of any support on that.
Great. Let's open it up, and feel free if you have any comments or questions or things you want to ask Brian. Feel free to come off of mute and let it rip. After nearly a year in private beta, the Buddhist Geeks network is now open for any independent practitioners who want to engage in interdependent practice. You can find out more about the Buddhist Geeks network by visiting buddhistgeeks.network. And if you'd like to join the community and join us in regular social meditation practice or other events that we host there in the network, all freely offered, you're very welcome to do so, again, by visiting buddhistgeeks.network. Love to see you there.